if you have some kind of traumatic experience, the
Yeah.
only way to avoid re-experiencing that is to feel like you're in control of your immediate environment and the people in it.
And, if you don't want this marriage for your kids, then getting out is probably a good idea for them.
I think the way to think about this is we all have a part of ourselves that's very goal driven and that's very
Mm.
relational. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And today we're focusing on the topic of should I stay or should I go? It's that time old question. You're in a relationship. It doesn't seem to be working and not working and not working, but you feel like you got to stay for all the right reasons. And you just don't know what to do. And it's so appropriate for this time of year. And to share with us on this topic, I have Kate Anthony, who's a certified divorce coach from the West Coast. And she's got, guess what? A program called Should I Stay or Should I Go? She's kind of an expert on this. How are you, Kate?
I'm great, Rich. So good to be here with you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. And so the question I ask everyone on the front end, because we all like a good story, is how did your heart lead you into this work? This really,
Mm.
really fun, joyful work of working with people in divorce and other relationship situations.
I know it's so much fun. I mean I love it. I love it. It is my passion in life, and I really got into it the way that most of us get into things like this, which is that I went through a divorce myself almost 14 years ago. But for the 2 to 3 years before that, there was a lot of should I stay or should I go? Should I stay or should I go? And I was really looking for a burning bush. I was looking for someone to give me a definitive answer, right? Is this worth it? Like, I always felt there was something else. There was something else that we could do or try, or I could do or try that would just the crest of the hill was just over there, and if we could just hit it, right? Or was just this kind of just the way it is? Like, was our relationship simply unworkable? And it took me so many years to get to the point of clarity that really our relationship was, as married people, was unworkable. And I just didn't want people to have to go through that much agony. I felt like, I was looking for this burning bush, right? But I think that ultimately, and what I do now is I help people with a bit of a system
Mm-hmm.
for answering the question. When I was going through this, there was no Instagram. Coaching was barely a thing. There weren't people out there doing this, and there was certainly not this, availability of access to people helping you find the answers. And so I created that. Now that we're in this digital age where there was no podcasting, there was none of that stuff. So that's kind of what led me here. I just didn't want other women to go through what I went through. And additionally, what I didn't know was that my relationship was actually emotionally abusive. I was trying and trying and trying to bend myself into pretzels in order to fit what I was kept being told was the shape that I should be to make things fine. And I didn't know that that was actually a tool of abusers, right? That the target is always shifting. And so the other thing that my heart has led me to is becoming a domestic violence victims advocate and helping women really identify abuse, especially emotional abuse and coercive control, because it's so insidious and so confusing in their relationships, so that they can actually understand what's happening.
Yeah, makes perfect
So,
sense. I was thinking about my own divorce while you were talking about, you're saying, yeah, there was no podcast and this and that. I was like, yeah, there wasn't. And
right, right.
now you mention it, that like, I think when I first started struggling in my marriage, there was what there was AOL. So it's
Right.
like a lot of you people may have never heard of AOL, but there was a single AOL. There's still people who have AOL email addresses, so I know it's still out there. But
It is.
AOL had within it, it had chat rooms and groups within it that you could go to as an AOL member. It was really a benefit of membership. It's not like it is today where you can find 1.5 million groups for free on Facebook or anywhere else, or just there's 10,000 ways to organize that stuff now.
Yeah.
And there were Actually, there were no, I remember going to a single dads group. And it's because my marriage was so upside down and my partner was so non-functional that I was
Mm,
functioning as a single dad in a marriage. And I
yeah.
thought, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to carry this load. And then I was thinking, about, you were saying you're always looking for the next thing, and then it'll work. And so then it'll get better. I'll take it, my kids, the pressure will be off my kids, and we'll have time to work on our marriage. And I've got in that single dads group, and I got everything crack-a-lacking. They introduced me to some amazing business tools, these guys. They were all like retired IBM execs who were taking
Oh,
these
wow.
business tools and applying them to their lives. So
Yeah.
streamlined my whole business while I was doing it. And guess what? Like, changed everything except the dynamic in our marriage. And then I went looking for the next thing. And
Right.
still, so even what I'm thinking is, even with all these resources, I'm sure that people are on the same kind of twisted mission that I was on. If yeah, maybe I'm going to find out what it's like to get divorced, but maybe what they're really trying to do, there's got to be some way to make this thing work, because
Yeah.
I'm not
That's
going
what they
to,
want.
I'm not going to do to my kids what my parents did to me. It took me a while to figure out that my parents didn't do anything to me, actually, but that was my story and I was sticking to it. Or the other one was, I hold the institution of marriage as sacred in a way that my parents didn't. I'm going to show them, which really wasn't true either. But I had all these stories and the values, that I got from my grandparents or whatever. And in the end, I had to move through all that stuff to get to the place where I knew whether I was going to stay or whether I was going to go. And then the last piece is, I remember at 5 years, I said, we're getting divorced. And I saw what my kids were going through. And I was like, holy crap, I can't do this to my kids. It's
Yeah.
better for me to tough it out. And then 5 years later, I got serious about getting divorced, and because my kids suffered even
That's
more
right.
in those
That's
5
right.
years. It's like I realized, oh my God, this sucks even worse for them. So
That's
there's a
right.
lot, I'm sharing all that, not just so that I can lay out my pain for the listeners, but to let people know there's a lot to this topic. There's a lot going on. There's what we were raised with, how we grew up, what our own experience is, what are the resources out there? And even with the infinite resources of the internet, which resources are you tapping?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And 100%. And I think that, one of the biggest myths that I, work to break every single day is that staying in a toxic marriage or even an unhappy marriage, which ultimately is unhealthy, is not best for children, because they are, if you think about, we tend to repeat what was modeled to us. And, if you don't want this marriage for your kids, then getting out is probably a good idea for them.
We don't tend to. We accept. We graciously accept the programming that's presented to us, because it's all the only resource we have, and it's only later in life that we get to question it. And why don't we just for a second, since you've hit it a couple of times, let's talk about, what does toxic mean?
Gosh,
I've got my own ideas, but I know that you're actually better grounded in this than I am, with your background in domestic violence, which I have shied away from thus far.
Yeah, honestly, I tried to, and then it just, because I work primarily with women, it just became like I had to, I really had to. I had to get certified in it, because I had so many people coming to me to talk about it and needing help in it, that I felt like I need to now take this training so that I really know what I'm talking about. And I mean, I think that there's a difference between toxic and abusive. Toxic, I think, is anything that's not really fulfilling. If it's not pouring like fertilizer and nutrients and healthy growth serum into the relationship, then it's probably pouring something that is doing the opposite.
The problem with divorce is not knowing the territory. When we know the territory, it's easier to make choices. Well, we've created the divorce guide for you. This is a free ebook that's going to help you learn the territory and help you to make better decisions. And all you need to do is go to bit.ly/The Divorce Guide. Just one word, The Divorce Guide, bit.ly/The
the divorce guide. Get it now.
Right. Yep. If your relationship, if your partner is not ultimately uplifting you, right? If the scales are balanced or, not weighted in the sort of uplifting and happy category, then probably then it is weighing you down or pushing you down, or somehow it's stifling your growth. That's probably toxic. Abuse is a little bit more of a deliberate attempt, because all abuse is rooted in power and control. So if someone's actions and their words, but particularly their actions, because their words are often a little, confusing. But if their actions are mostly about them being able to maintain power and control over you, then that's abuse. And people do this with money. It's a huge one. Financial abuse is enormous. They do it with, there's physical violence, obviously. There is emotional violence. I mean, someone can clench their fist from across the room, and if it serves to keep you in line and not say the thing was about to come out of your mouth, that is domestic violence. If they're punching a hole in the wall next to your head, that is domestic violence. If they're just using coercively controlling tactics to keep you, quote, in line, if you feel frightened, if you feel like a rat in a maze, like nothing you can do is right, if you feel like you're scared of the next thing you say or do, that is probably coercive control, which is a form of domestic violence.
And complete transparency, probably any relationship where there's yelling and screaming, there's a form of emotional violence going on, maybe on both sides. There are a lot of cultures where that's the norm. I've had clients who said, oh, my parents were Italian and that's just what we did. Or my parents were Irish. That's just what we did. Culturally, they thought that was okay because that was kind of the norm. But on the other side of that, if one person is yelling and screaming and the other person is experiencing fear, and then out of that fear, they're yelling and screaming also, and it's escalating and it's escalating, then just imagine what the children who are completely powerless in that situation are experiencing. And so even if it seems like it's okay because that's how it was when you grew up, it might not really be okay. There's a lot to think about here. And there's all kinds of ways of controlling people. That violence is very overt. There's all kinds of juicy covert ways that don't appear toxic at all. But, read Melody Beattie's book, Codependent No More. Whether you believe codependency is a real disease or not, the book outlines some behaviors that are very toxic, which I read and I was convicted of when I read it. Part of extricating myself out of my marriage was, oh my God, I'm a raging codependent who's been trying to fix his wife for years, and controlling her by it. And I don't like who I am, and I don't like what I'm doing to her, and I don't like what I'm teaching my kids. Yeah. So, let's say you're someone like me who back then, not today, who was in a relationship that you're just not sure about. You feel like you're doing everything you can. You feel like it's important for you to be there. You have all those tensions, the children, the marriage, maybe you really love the person too, and yet you don't like how you're showing up or how the other person is showing up. How do you wend your way through those competing interests and values?
Well, I think the first thing you do, and this is in my, the work that I do in my programs, and I think it's similar to what you talked about earlier in this conversation, was the first thing you do is you put all of that aside, you do your own work. I had a couples therapists, it was a couple that ran our couples therapy group, and they said individual therapy is the death knell for marriages. And what I learned later is that what individual therapy did they asserted that if you go to individual therapy, you'll definitely get divorced. And, what I learned later was
bad.
Well, right. Why is that? Let's get underneath that. Maybe it's because I'm getting some clarity about myself and I'm building my self-esteem and I'm learning about myself in ways that are empowering me to now make better choices for myself. Yeah. That would be the goal of therapy, right? Of individual therapy. And so I think that is the first thing that we do is we get inside. We do our relationship in my work. We do our relationship history. We do inventories of our relational mapping from our childhood, our parents, all of that stuff, attachment styles, all of it, so that we can actually know who we are in relationship. Because so often, especially with women, we are so focused on the other person, especially if there's been abuse or even any kind of manipulate, whatever it is, right? We're so focused on the other that we have to take our focus off of them and put it on ourselves and look at our own, how we show up in relationships and heal those parts of ourselves, or at least work on them, expose them, lift up the hood and see how the thing functions. And then you can start to have a little bit more objectivity, actually, right? When you get to know yourself better, you have a lot more clarity with which to look at all the relationships in your life.
I love that. I love the relationship mapping. We have a process we do with couples here where they do a 3-generation genealogram, but it's a behavioral. And they start to see that the things they learned about how to interact with their partner, they learned from like their great grandfather Harold, and the things that they learned about never getting divorced, they learned from their great grandmother Edna, and then you can see how the attitude is passed down from generation to generation. It may not even be genetic; it just might be learned, or it might be genetic. But it's interesting how the behaviors they go right down the line. And I love your emphasis on when we do the personal work. We start to expose that and turn that up. And that's the opportunity to break, I'm going to sound religious for a second, to break that generational curse,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And it really is a curse when you think about it. I mean, if there's a behavior that's been gone from generation to generation that makes your partner or your kids feel crappy, it's a curse. It's bad. It
is. Yeah.
What if it makes you feel crappy?
Right. And so much of it, this has become sort of like, I think this could have been another word for 2022, but, so much of it is rooted in trauma.
Yeah.
And that trauma does get passed on genetically, but it also gets passed down behaviorally. So we do have to look at all of that.
Actually, there was this great study done with mice where they burned, I'm probably screwing this up. I should probably look up the study, but it goes something like this. They burn like an incense, a particular sandalwood incense, and then they would give them electric shocks on the pad they're standing on, right? And we do great things to mice, right? But it's even worse. Even worse with people, though. I mean, go to Ukraine. So they did that. They did that a bunch until all they had to do was burn the incense, and the mice would freak out, right? So, but they didn't need the shock. It was like, holy crap, the shock's coming. Then they didn't do anything for 2 generations. The third generation, they burnt the incense, and all the mice start freaking out.
Oh my
because
God.
They've made a connection between the trauma of the electric shock and that smell. So trauma isn't just something we experience. It is something that's passed on, or at least with mice. We're probably not that different. All right,
no, we're not, for sure.
We're doing the personal work, and we're asking ourselves, should I stay or should I go?
Mm-hmm. So we do the personal work, and then in my work, I move into a little bit more of the cultural stuff, and I do a lot around toxic masculinity and male entitlement. And
don't get me started. Toxic masculinity is a very political term right now, but
I know. I think it needs a rebrand. Needs a rebrand. I don't like the word. Is that
toxic femininity is defined as women turning on themselves, and toxic masculinity is about how men behave towards women. So it's all about men being bad. But
it's actually not, right? It's actually about. It is about.
I'm just talking about
turning on themselves. I know Instagram. Exactly. This is why I feel like it needs a rebrand, right? I think that it does not mean that men are toxic. It means that we live in a culture that does not that does not allow men to express their emotions in a free way, and doesn't, most of the reason I work with women is that a lot of men don't want to do this work. It's hard to bring men into this work, and I'm, God love you if you are like, this is what we need.
Really, I work mostly with couples, and it's usually the women who take the lead.
Right.
Occasionally you get a man who does. And in the world of divorce, I do get male referrals, but it is mostly women who lead. When it comes to emotional work, it is mostly women who lead. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. But I think the primary one is that in our culture, men are dissuaded from having all of their feelings.
That's right.
Men should only have feelings that make them feel powerful.
That's right.
And as a result, they're cut off from their ability to really have full and complete empathy. As a reformed toxic male, let me tell you that it's about this. It's not okay to feel fearful, hurt, or sad. And when we cut ourselves off from fearful, hurt, or sad, we can't fully connect to other people. And
then it festers, and it explodes in rage, because those are the hard feelings that cover the soft feelings.
They feel powerful.
That's right. Because they have to take back their power. So I do a lot of uncovering of that, because I think there's a lot of it that women don't quite get or understand, and a lot of So this is sort of the more intellectual piece of my work and my program, sort of giving them like, what is abuse, right? What is a trauma bond? How does he know he's abusive? How does like alcoholism, addiction, infidelity, mental illness, how do these things impact relationships, and what is your role and your part in that? Should I go to therapists? Should I go to therapy? Should we go to couples therapy? Should I go to therapy with someone who's abusing me? Right. So just answering all the questions that really are coming out constantly. And then I move into the healing, right? More of the healing stuff, like emotional regulation and grounding and codependency work. I think one of the best books, I don't know if you've read this one, but I think the best book on codependency is by a woman named Pia Mellody, called Facing Codependence. And it's all about how codependence springs forth from childhood trauma and the ways it does that, and how it manifests in it's sort of she has a codependency tree where the roots of the tree are childhood trauma and abuse, and the trunk of the tree is the codependence, and then the rest of the tree, the branches and the leaves, are all sorts of addictions, psychological disorders, mental health disorders, all sorts of, right? And it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think
as long as the name Melody is in there somewhere, I'm in. So
yeah, I know. Isn't that funny?
It is a little strange.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is, like, out in the media, they're questioning whether codependency is really a thing.
Right.
It's just a pattern that we slapped a name on. But I'm going to also tell you, as someone who worked in addictions for years with families and addicts and alcoholics, those folks know that codependency is a thing. In fact, most of the addicts and alcoholics recognize that their precipitating behavior was codependency, and then they moved on.
That's the tree,
right?
That's the tree.
They moved on to bigger and better things.
That's right. Here's the tree. I don't know if you can see this.
Yes.
And absolutely, it's a thing. And I think we have to better understand it. And look, I also think it is a function of the patriarchy. I think women tend to be far more codependent, because that's what we're nurtured and taught, and sort of indoctrinated to be, these caretakers and nurturers, and he'll be okay if you just, and, controlling all the, being the emotional regulators of the family, all of this stuff, which is sort of codependent behavior. But true codependence really comes out of trauma.
Yeah,
it really does.
Makes perfect sense. I mean, if you, when you think about it, if you have some kind of traumatic experience, if you have not handled the emotion from the trauma, like as in let it go, if the emotion is so intense that you don't want to revisit it, then all of your unconscious programming is going to be about ways that you can avoid re-experiencing that. And the only way to avoid re-experiencing that is to feel like you're in control of your immediate environment and the people in it. So it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. That's
or
right.
the
That's
alternative
right.
would be to find a way to actually release the trauma and the emotion. There are a number of techniques out there, but that's not what this episode's about.
Right.
So,
That's right. Right.
so,
Exactly.
so these folks are in here, they're doing the deep exploration. And I'm curious, how often what percentage of people are I should stay and what percentage of people are I should go?
Well, if you're Googling, should I stay or should I go? And you come up to my program, you're not in a happy marriage. So
I kind of figured, but I
You
thought
know-
I'd show a little optimism.
right. I mean, listen, I do have clients who have been able to turn their marriages around through our work because they're able to bring this stuff to their spouse. And if they have a spouse who is committed to the relationship and to uncovering. I mean, I have a client right now who's in my group program, who, brought all this to her husband finally. And she's like, here's what I'm learning. And he turned around and he shared childhood trauma with her and their couples therapist that she had never heard about in 32 years of marriage.
Mhm.
He had never shared this very extreme childhood trauma. And he was finally willing to admit to it, to talk about it, and to admit that this was the source of his rage
Mhm.
and his outbursts, right?
Mhm.
And this is what toxic masculinity is, right? It's
Yep.
not that he has done nothing wrong other than not be given a platform to or a place to process this really extreme trauma.
So toxic
And-
masculinity doesn't necessarily mean you can't smoke cigars and drink scotch and cheer for sports teams and be kind of a butch dude.
Dude, no.
That's
That's
Well,
right.
but there's some confusion out there in the media about that.
There's a
about
lot of confusion about it.
there's this book a client of mine turned me on to called No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is all about the men responding to toxic masculinity by being really nice and really accommodating, and I think to this debate about what is masculinity that's out there has a lot to do with the fact that there is a lot of freaking toxic masculinity out there, but that doesn't
That's
mean
right.
you can't be male in some of the traditional ways that we consider male, and there's
That's
confusion around it.
Yeah, there is. And look, it's confusing. It is confusing when we've lived for generations with this messaging to try and unravel, what is masculine, what is feminine, what, emotions. Oh, so I have to be more lean into my feminine and have more of my emotions. Well, emotions are not masculine or feminine. We all have them, right? This does not take away your masculinity in any way, shape, or form.
I am done with, we all have a feminine and a masculine side, especially now in the age of 26 to 46 genders. All right. I think the way to think about this is we all have a part of ourselves that's very goal driven and that's very relational, right? Let's just throw the words masculine and feminine
I love
off
that.
it, because what happens is for guys, they go, "Oh, I have a feminine side. Don't want to talk to that." Nope.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
Because I'm a guy.
Yes,
Yeah,
you're right.
and maybe
Absolutely.
there's some cultural homophobia seeping in there or something like that. But if you think about it as the attributes of those two sides, then the whole thing changes. As a man, I can be more relational, right?
Right.
I can think more about what people around me are feeling and what happens in the ecology when I take an action. But we should do 6 more shows together, Kate. Today we're on Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool that opened that up for your client's husband to unearth and release some of that trauma. So he's not locked into that pattern. That is amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like it. And I have to say that, look, when women become empowered and they leave toxic relationships, I am in the stands rah-rahing, but even more when they take the work and they bring it to men who are then willing to also pick up the baton and then run with it in their own lives, that's actually better. Right? That's better, because that's how we actually change the systems and the culture. And I don't want there to be this much divorce in the world. What I want is for people to be healthy relationships that are really fulfilled and loving.
Yes.
That's what I want.
I want to contradict something I said. I said I was trying to be optimistic for marriage, but in truth, my personal mission is about helping parents in any circumstance, whether they're together or apart, to have a strong working relationship that produces joy and resilience so that their children are given the tools that they need to have joy and resilience. And so, the truth is that my first wife and I, we were not our best selves when we were together, and we were probably never going to be our best selves when we're together. That might have been a slim possibility, but we couldn't reach it or see it in time for our children. And so we were really better apart.
That's right. Me too.
Sometimes, and I'm remarried 23 years, and we are, it appears, really better together.
So far.
Right. But, the running joke is we're taking it one day at a time, which when we first got married, I said that to my wife. She said, "What do you mean we're taking it one day at a time?" And now 23 years later, she's like, "You know what? You're right. We're taking it one day at a time."
That's right.
She's come around to this point of view. but the point is that if we're going to do the work and have the internal healing and show up fulfilled, happy, nurturing, caring human beings, we've got to figure out whether that's together or apart, and whichever we choose is best. So it's not it's not so much, it would be better if you were together or better you're apart. It's like you need to find your own way. And programs like Should I Stay or Should I Go, where you're really exploring this and encouraging people to dig deep, are what's needed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it. Thanks.
How can people find you, Kate, and your program?
Well, my website is kateanthony.com, and you'll see all options for all my programs there. I am on Instagram and TikTok at The Divorce Survival Guide, and my podcast is The Divorce Survival Guide Podcast, which I'm going to have Rich on soon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to that, because I'm loving this. I'm telling you, we could talk.
I know, me too. Yeah, exactly.
I have a divorce survival kit. I don't think it's the same as the survival guide, though. It's like it's really, I want to see your guide. I bet you there's some good stuff in there.
I don't actually have a guide.
I'll give you my kit.
Right.
You can rebrand it.
I had one, but anyway, it's a long story. But I have a one for kids, like really how to. I'm also a co-parenting specialist, certified co-parenting specialist. So I have one about how to protect your kids throughout this whole process.
Awesome.
But yeah, that one's now called how to if I can say it on your show, that one is now called How to Not Fuck Up Your Kids.
You can say this show is not rated for children, period, at all. So when we put it up on YouTube, it says not for kids. So you can say whatever you want on this show.
Fabulous. Yes. So yes, it's called How to Not Fuck Up Your Kids.
Yeah. Well, and it's really important, because the truth is you can fuck up your kids, married or divorced, by the way.
Well, I mean, the statistics, the research shows that divorce doesn't fuck up your kids. Staying in a toxic marriage will fuck up your kids.
It is the worst.
And having a toxic divorce will fuck up your kids.
Is the next worst.
Right. So
then the next best is a good co-parenting divorce. And then up on the high pedestal are marriages where there's solid communication and co-parenting going on. I guess maybe that's the 45% that say, well, that would be really optimistic. But you know what? The other thing is that there's actually not, for the kids, there's not that big a difference between couples who stay together and have a good relationship and couples who have a pretty clean divorce where they're co-parenting well. The difference is not that much. It's only in the long term, it's really it's negligible, but in the short term, sure, they have spikes of anxiety, they have depression, whatever. But getting divorced does not turn your kid into a drug addict and an alcoholic. Yeah. Right. Over the long term, amicable, collaborative divorces with collaborative co-parents, over the long term, there's hardly any difference between the mental health. Really cool when you think about it.
So good, right? What a relief. If only people could get divorced amicably.
Well, they do pretty well at it. I was really lucky that I bumbled into a coach. And my coach wasn't a coach. It was a divorce lawyer who I went to college with, who kind of adopted me and said, listen, we've known each other a long time. You're going to screw this up if you don't get help. So we're going to talk to each other while you do this. And I'm going to tell you what to do with your blame, and where to stick it, you know,
So good.
and how to show up in front of your kids, and
Yeah.
and to stop doing all the things that are making it worse. And
Yeah.
that was incredibly helpful.
And everyone needs someone like that in their corner, because so much of the advice out there is so toxic, right? And creates unhealthy and really contentious divorces,
Yeah.
because people don't get it, right?
Well, this experience of divorce is so much like warfare, and when we feel like we're at war, we give ourselves permissions to say and do things that we wouldn't normally do, and I promise you that even with all that help, there are things that I said that I deeply regretted years later, and that I needed to clean up with the mother of my children. She's the mother of my children.
Same.
And I'm proud to say that when her mom died, I took her, the mother of my children, to the funeral and stood by her side, as her parenting partner and friend, even though even though things weren't like, we weren't BFFs, that all came out of that person's helping me through that experience and really helping me get my head straight about what I needed to do for the family.
Right. Absolutely. It's so good. It's such a blessing. Such a blessing. We need more of those people.
Yeah. The question I ask everyone at the end, and I'm so sorry that it's the end, is what's the legacy you want to leave behind?
Well, I feel like it sounds so trite, but I really mean it. Which is that I want women to feel empowered in their relationships. And empowered is such a buzzword and overused, but I really mean it, I think, in the most organic sense of the word, that to feel our personal power and to bring that into relationships, and to know that we have choice, we have agency, and we have personal power, right? That doesn't mean power over, right? But internally over our own lives. And I think the more we can do that, the more we shift, the more women show up that way in relationships, the more we're going to start to shift the toxicity in relationships, the patriarchal oppression and structures that we all, the systemic stuff that we all live with. That's what I want.
I love it.
And if I can contribute to that in any way, shape, or form, I'm thrilled.
I love the way you articulated some of what empowered means. Also, you're right. It is the words I hear the most, and I love these words, don't get me wrong, by the way, are empowered and authentic.
Yeah.
I want everyone to be all empowered and authentic, but sometimes.
What does that mean?
Right.
Right. We say that so much. And there's a lot of the toxic positivity movement that uses those words. So I think we do have to dig a little bit more deeply into what those actually mean.
I think at the heart of empowered for me, and you, like, since we're just we're defining labels for each other, it's probably the realization that we are causal, or that we can be causal, maybe, is a better way to put it.
That's right. If we so choose.
We don't have to be in reaction all the time. We can be proactive.
That's right. I love that.
Not that there isn't resistance, not that there aren't structures and beliefs and stuff like that we might end up pushing against. But when we get a clear idea of where we want to go, and we get that we can take ourselves there, whether we're men or women or whatever, that's a form of, I know where I want to go and I can see how to get there. That's a form of empowerment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will take action in order to move that forward, right? Because we can all sit around being like, oh, wouldn't that be great? Like, manifesting shit by sitting on a rock and like thinking about it. But like, no, take action as well.
And in the 1800s, being an empowered woman meant a very different thing, because the structure was a lot more rigid. But and yet I know you can find examples of empowered women in that time period. It's not always about everything. It's not about the patriarchy being gone as much as, all right, so we're negotiating something that isn't right and isn't fair and isn't even. How do I negotiate this in a way that works for me and my family, and that shows that I'm not limited by that thing? All right, that's a whole nother podcast. Thank you so much for your time. Such a pleasure to meet you, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you more in the future.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Thanks, Rich.